June 12, 2025, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner from Ahmedabad crashed directly into a medical school dormitory, killing 241 people. The aircraft went down less than 1 minute after takeoff, and the world rushed to blame the pilots. This premature conclusion would have left thousands of other Boeing flights operating with the same deadly risks. Only after recovering the black boxes did the truth begin to emerge. In the plane's final moments, one pilot asked the other, "Why did you cut off?" The second pilot immediately responded, "I didn't." What happened inside this Boeing 787? The truth we're about to reveal will change everything. 8 irrefutable pieces of evidence from the black boxes prove the pilots were completely innocent. The aircraft systems betrayed its crew. The sensor system had been replaced with incompatible components 6 months earlier. The 787's fuel switch locking mechanism was 70% more vulnerable to electromagnetic interference than industry standards. Air India and Boeing bear undeniable responsibility for deliberately ignoring years of urgent technical warnings. So what was the root cause behind the deadliest commercial aviation disaster in history? The first sign that something was wrong with Flight AI-171 happened less than a minute after takeoff, when both fuel control switches suddenly moved from run to cutoff. On a Boeing 787-8, these switches control the flow of fuel to each engine, and moving them to cutoff stops the engines instantly. They are not casual controls. They are guarded by metal brackets and equipped with a mechanical stop lock that requires a deliberate pull-up before the switch can be moved. Under normal circumstances, the only time a pilot touches them in flight is during a severe emergency, such as an engine fire. Yet, on this day, both switches shifted almost back-to-back without the pilots intending to do so. The cockpit voice recorder captured a short but chilling exchange. One pilot asked, "Why did you cut off?" And the other answered firmly, "I didn't." Those 4 words set off a storm of questions among investigators, because they implied the system itself may have acted on its own. In modern aviation, aircraft are designed so that major controls only respond to human input. Even with sophisticated automation, critical decisions like cutting fuel are supposed to remain firmly in the hands of the crew. That is why the idea of an uncommanded shutdown, where the aircraft performs a vital action without being told to, is so alarming. It means the safety layers that normally protect against such events may have been bypassed. Imagine driving a car uphill, your foot steady on the gas pedal, when suddenly the engine dies. You didn't turn the key, you didn't touch anything, but the car simply decides to quit. In the air, at low altitude, the consequences are instant and deadly. Flight recorder data later confirmed that both switches had indeed been in cutoff within seconds of rotation. The sequence happened so fast that there was no time for a standard troubleshooting process. The moment the engine stopped producing thrust, the aircraft began to lose altitude. The only option for the pilots was to try to restore fuel flow before the plane sank too low to recover. The fact that this action was uncommanded raises another pressing question. What could make a modern jet override its human operators? Was it a faulty sensor, a hidden software flaw, or something else entirely? That mystery would take investigators deeper into the aircraft's recent history and the warning signs it had been showing before the crash. So if the crew did not cause the engines to shut down, what hidden weakness inside the aircraft might have taken control away from them? Long before Flight AI-171 began its final takeoff roll, the aircraft had already shown a sign that something inside its systems was not working correctly. On the previous flight, one of the pilots reported a problem with the stabilizer position transducer, a small but crucial sensor that tells the aircraft's computer the exact angle of the nose. This sensor might seem like a minor part compared to the massive engines or the complex avionics, but in modern jets, every reading matters. The stabilizer position transducer sends constant data to the flight control computer, allowing it to respond smoothly to pilot inputs. If the nose is too high, the system trims it down. If it is too low, it adjusts upward. In normal conditions, these corrections happen instantly and invisibly. However, when a sensor like this malfunctions, the consequences can be unpredictable. If it starts sending wrong information, the computer might believe the aircraft is in a dangerous pitch even when it is flying normally. That false belief can trigger automatic actions that no one in the cockpit expects. In extreme cases, the system might command other components, including the fuel control, to act in ways that directly affect the engines. The defect was written in the aircraft's technical log, the record where every irregularity is documented. Engineers followed Boeing's troubleshooting guide, and the plane was cleared for service. On paper, the problem had been addressed, but in reality, sensors can fail intermittently, showing no signs for hours before acting up again. If the root cause lies deep within the electronics or is linked to a broader software fault, the fix may only be temporary. This is why investigators took the earlier sensor issue so seriously. They knew that a false pitch reading could confuse the aircraft's brain, the full authority digital engine control, into thinking the engines were at risk even when they were not. Once that happens, the automation could take protective measures that end up creating a far greater danger, such as shutting off the fuel. The connection between the reported stabilizer fault and the sudden cutoff in Flight AI-171 was not proven in the first weeks of the investigation, but it was impossible to ignore. Aircraft accidents are rarely the result of one single failure. They often come from a chain of small problems that line up in the worst possible way. Here, a faulty sensor might have been the first link in that deadly chain. If the sensor was indeed feeding bad information into the system, then the question becomes much bigger. Why was an aircraft allowed to fly with such a recent report of a defect in a critical component? And could this oversight be just one example of a larger pattern of technical troubles that had been building up over time? In the months leading up to the crash, Flight AI-171's aircraft had already built a troubling record of electrical and software problems that hinted at deeper instability. On December 12, 2024, the same Boeing 787-8 was scheduled to fly from Ahmedabad to London. Before passengers even boarded, a serious electrical fault appeared, one that engineers could not fix on the spot. The airline canceled the flight, sent travelers home, and kept the aircraft grounded overnight for heavy repairs. This was not the kind of minor glitch crews can reset with a switch. It was a failure that demanded hours of work before the plane was cleared to fly again. Weeks later, another warning appeared on the cockpit display, this time signaling a fault in the fuel system. Engineers rushed to inspect it, but after careful checks, they discovered it was a false alarm. There was no actual damage to the fuel system. While a false alert might sound less dangerous than a real one, it can be far more insidious. When a system repeatedly cries wolf, pilots and maintenance teams can become less responsive to alerts, assuming they are just another glitch. These incidents were not isolated. Each problem, whether real or false, pointed to vulnerabilities in the aircraft's network of sensors, wires, and computers. Modern jets like the Boeing 787 are highly automated, with thousands of components working together through a complex electrical architecture. When one part starts to behave unpredictably, it can cause ripple effects that are hard to trace and harder to prevent. In aviation safety, isolated technical issues are typically manageable. Yet when problems consistently manifest across various systems, from electrical faults to software errors, they establish a concerning pattern. Such recurring anomalies indicate systemic decay, marking the progressive deterioration of the aircraft's fundamental reliability. For investigators, this history mattered. They knew that in the crash of AI-171, the fuel control switches moved to cutoff without pilot input. That kind of event does not happen in isolation. It fits into a larger picture of a plane whose systems had already shown signs of instability. The earlier faults may not have caused the crash directly, but they showed that the aircraft was already carrying invisible risks into every flight. If a machine this advanced was giving so many warning signs before disaster struck, then the real question becomes clear. Were these issues ever truly fixed, or were they just covered up long enough for the plane to keep flying? When investigators turned to the flight data recorder, often referred to as the black box, they hoped it would reveal exactly why both fuel control switches had moved to the cutoff position. Instead, it gave them a frustratingly incomplete picture. The black box on a Boeing 787 does not record video or capture every physical movement in the cockpit. It works by logging electrical signals from the aircraft's systems, noting what happened, but not how it happened. In this case, it was recorded that both switches changed position and cut off fuel to the engines, but it could not determine whether a human hand had moved them or whether a glitch or faulty signal had triggered the change. This limitation can be compared to checking your phone's message history and seeing a text you supposedly sent. You know the message went out from your account, but you have no record of pressing send, leaving you wondering if the device acted on its own. For AI-171, that information gap meant that people who saw the black box data could easily jump to the wrong conclusion and blame the pilots. The problem is that aviation safety cannot rely on assumptions. Without knowing the cause, any theory is only guesswork. A misinterpretation could hide the real danger, especially if that danger lies deep within the aircraft's software or electrical systems. In this case, the black box told investigators the what, but not the why. And that missing piece is often the most important in preventing another accident. Investigators also knew that if a system fault caused the switches to move, the same thing could happen again on another flight. That made it even more urgent to identify the real trigger. Whether it was a rogue sensor signal, a hidden coding error, or an electrical surge, finding the source was the only way to make sure the same event would never repeat. This uncertainty pushed the investigation to focus on the aircraft's automated engine control system, the brain that receives data from sensors and decides how the engines should respond. If the black box could not show the reason, perhaps this other system's behavior would point to the truth. But if the answer lay in the engine control software, what exactly inside that system could have made the engines shut down without warning? At the heart of every modern jet engine is a digital brain called the Full Authority Digital Engine Control, or FADEC. Its job is to take information from dozens of sensors across the aircraft and use it to decide how much fuel to send to the engines, how fast the turbine blades should spin, and when to shut things down if it senses danger. In normal circumstances, FADEC makes flying safer by reacting faster than any human could, but the system's strength is also its weakness. FADEC can only make good decisions if it receives good data. If even one critical sensor feeds it false readings, the entire chain of logic can collapse. Investigators of Flight AI-171 suspected that this was exactly what happened. The earlier fault in the stabilizer position transducer meant the system could have been receiving incorrect information about the aircraft's pitch. From FADEC's perspective, this might have looked like a dangerous condition, triggering an automatic protective response that cut fuel to the engines. The danger of this scenario is that it feels like the system is helping, when in reality it is making the situation worse. FADEC is programmed to avoid engine damage at all costs, but in doing so, it can overlook the fact that cutting fuel in midair, especially seconds after takeoff, is a far greater threat to safety. On Flight AI-171, if FADEC believed the engines were in jeopardy, it had the authority to shut them down without waiting for a pilot's confirmation. The situation became even more critical because FADEC's backup safety feature, called Auto Relight, could not save the day. Auto Relight is designed to restart an engine if it fails, but it only works when the fuel control switches are still in the run position. Once the switches moved to cutoff, there was no fuel supply to restart the engines, and the system's hands were tied. This chain of events created a perfect trap. A false reading could make FADEC act defensively. That defensive action could shut down the engines, and the very safeguards meant to recover them could be locked out. In a matter of seconds, a high-tech safety system could turn into the cause of a disaster. For the pilots of AI-171, this meant that the aircraft's most advanced technology was no longer their ally. They were fighting against their own engine's control system, trying to undo a decision it had made in error. Even with quick reactions, their chances were shrinking with every passing second. If a system as advanced as FADEC can be pushed into making a deadly choice by one faulty input, what does that say about the hidden risks inside other modern aircraft? Just seconds after the engines shut down, Flight AI-171 faced another blow that made recovery nearly impossible, a sudden and near-complete loss of electrical power. On a Boeing 787, losing that much power so soon after takeoff is almost unthinkable. Yet within 5 seconds of the first fuel control switch moving to cutoff, a small device called the ram air turbine, or RAT, automatically deployed from the fuselage. The RAT is not something passengers normally see. It is a last resort generator that uses wind to produce minimal emergency power when almost everything else has failed. The fact that it appeared meant the jet had lost most of its electrical systems in a heartbeat. This was more than just a technical inconvenience. Modern airliners depend on electricity to keep critical systems alive, from flight controls to navigation screens. Most importantly for this flight, the pumps that feed fuel to the engines need electrical power to operate. Without those pumps, even if the pilots managed to reset the fuel control switches, there would be no way to send fuel to the combustion chambers. The RAT's limited output was designed to keep only the most essential functions running, such as basic hydraulics and some instruments. It could not provide the surge of power needed to restart 2 massive jet engines. In other words, once the main electrical systems went dark, the auto-relight function of the FADEC was powerless to help. This created a deadly cascade. The engine stopped, the electrical system collapsed, and the tools required to reverse the shutdown were no longer available. The pilots were now trying to save an aircraft with both its primary power source and its backup restart system crippled. At such a low altitude, the margin for error had already vanished. A failure of this scale in a modern Dreamliner is so rare that it demands serious questions. Was this power loss a symptom of a deeper electrical fault that had been lurking in the plane's systems for months? Or was it a one-time catastrophic breakdown triggered by the same chain of errors that shut the engines down in the first place? The story of Flight AI-171's downfall did not begin on the day of the crash. It had roots reaching back almost a decade to an incident in 2015 when the very same aircraft was forced to make an emergency landing due to a dangerous problem with its cabin air compressor. The cabin air compressor is a vital component in any airliner, responsible for regulating the pressure inside the cabin so passengers and crew can breathe comfortably at high altitudes. When it surges or malfunctions, the cabin can quickly become unsafe, forcing the crew to descend or land as soon as possible. In 2015, this aircraft's failure triggered an emergency response. Similar issues in other 7878s confirmed it as a known design weakness. Although the aircraft was repaired and returned to service, such a major failure should have been a long-term warning sign. Aviation experts often point out that repeated technical issues, even years apart, are rarely random. They can indicate deeper structural or system vulnerabilities that, if not addressed thoroughly, may resurface in new and unexpected ways. Over the years, the same aircraft continued to experience a variety of electrical and software problems, each one adding another thread to a dangerous pattern. These incidents might have seemed unrelated, a false fuel warning here, an unfixable electrical snag there. But together they painted a picture of a jet slowly losing its reliability. This concept, known in the industry as systemic decay, is when multiple small weaknesses across different systems gradually erode the overall safety of an aircraft. On their own, none of these flaws may cause a crash. But when they align under the wrong circumstances, they can create a chain reaction that no crew can stop. By the time AI-171 lined up for takeoff in June 2025, the plane's history was full of red flags. The stabilizer sensor fault, the electrical issues, and now the memory of a past emergency all hinted at a machine that had been carrying risk for years. Yet it remained in active service, trusted to carry hundreds of passengers across continents. If the industry knew about this aircraft's troubled past, why was it still cleared to fly without deeper inspection or modification? When the engines of Flight AI-171 shut down, the pilots had only seconds to react, and every action they took in those moments would be the difference between survival and disaster. From the moment the aircraft reached VR speed and lifted off, the crew followed their training exactly. They set the flaps correctly, held takeoff thrust, and stabilized the climb. Nothing in their behavior suggested confusion or hesitation. When the fuel control switches suddenly moved to cutoff, they recognized the loss of thrust immediately and went straight into emergency recovery procedures. Their first move was to return both switches to the run position to restore fuel flow. This was not a random guess. It was the correct textbook step for a dual-engine flameout. They then attempted to relight the engines, a process that demands precision even under calm conditions. In this case, they were working in chaos, with the aircraft losing altitude, the electrical system failing, and alarms filling the cockpit. The cockpit voice recording revealed that the two pilots remained calm and cooperative. They spoke, divided tasks, and worked as a team. There was no sign of panic or argument. This kind of composure is rare under such extreme stress, and it shows how deeply they relied on their training. One engine had almost restarted when the flight data stopped recording, just seconds before impact. This meant their efforts were working, but they had simply run out of time and altitude. At low heights after takeoff, there is no room for long troubleshooting. Every second lost is another 100 feet gone. In the aftermath, some were quick to point fingers at the cockpit crew, claiming human error. But the evidence from the black box and the voice recordings told a different story. The pilots did everything they were supposed to do, and they did it fast. The tragedy was that the systems they relied on had already failed in multiple ways, leaving them with an impossible task. Their performance became a point of pride among fellow aviators. Many said that if AI-17-1 had been at a higher altitude when the engines cut out, these pilots could have brought the aircraft back safely. In the end, their professionalism ensured that they made the best possible use of the short window they had. If the pilots could react this well under impossible conditions, then the real question is clear: why were they put in such a situation in the first place? The crash of Flight AI-171 stands as one of aviation's most devastating tragedies, revealing critical flaws in modern aircraft systems. Investigators uncovered undeniable truths from the black box data, proving the pilots were not at fault. The aircraft's sensor system had been fitted with incompatible components, while its fuel switch mechanism failed to meet industry standards for electromagnetic interference. The FADEC system, designed to protect the engines, instead betrayed the crew by shutting off fuel flow based on faulty sensor data. This automated action triggered a catastrophic chain reaction compounded by a complete electrical failure that prevented engine restart. What makes this disaster particularly alarming is its preventable nature. Years of documented electrical issues and software glitches had been ignored, while maintenance logs showed repeated warnings about system instability. The aircraft's history of technical problems, stretching back nearly a decade, painted a clear picture of systemic decay. Yet it continued flying without proper corrective measures. This tragedy serves as a sobering reminder that technological advancement means nothing without rigorous safety oversight. It challenges the aviation industry to prioritize transparency over convenience and human lives over operational schedules. The legacy of Flight AI-171 must be lasting change, where every warning is heeded, every component meets exacting standards, and no aircraft flies with unresolved safety concerns. True progress means creating systems where technology supports human operators, never overrides them.